I'm Giovanna Pineda, Assistant Professor of History, and you're listening to the RICHES Documentary Podcast. Welcome to the RICHES Documentary Podcast. RICHES, the regional initiative for collecting the histories, experiences, and stories of Central Florida, is an umbrella program housing interdisciplinary public history projects that bring together different departments at the University of Central Florida with profit and nonprofit sectors of the community in order to promote the collection and preservation of the region's history. By facilitating research that records and presents the stories of communities, businesses, and institutions in Central Florida, RICHES seeks to provide the region with a deeper sense of its heritage. This series will feature a podcast every 2 weeks, in the middle and at the end of each month, that will explore various aspects of Central Florida history. In today's episode, the Winter Park Sinkhole, Eyewitness Reactions to a Disaster, Clayton Phillips interviews some of those who were present during the natural creation of a massive 300-foot hole in 1981. Stephen Sabasas narrates.
Sinkhole City, USA, what's known as Winter Park. Be careful driving through that town, especially after dark. You'll find yourself in the middle of a pit all covered up with dirt. That sinkhole swallowed Winter Park and it didn't even burn. Well, there's loads of houses in that hole. The swimming pool is gone. What's left of Denning Drive most likely won't be there for long. People are excited, they come from miles around to see those 6 new Porsches lying buried in the ground. Oh, the Sinkhole City, USA, what's known as Winter Park. Be careful driving through that town, especially after dark. You'll find yourself in the middle of a pit all covered up with dirt. That sinkhole swallowed Winter Park and it didn't even burn.
Hello, you are listening to a history of the Winter Park Sinkhole, about the issues surrounding the sinkhole disaster that occurred in the city of Winter Park, Florida, between May 8th and 10th of 1981. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Florida had become a state with a booming population, as a number of new residents moved into the area. Many of these new residents were unaware of the dangers involved with sinkholes and how they shaped the landscape of Central Florida. While the Winter Park Sinkhole did increase awareness of sinkholes, some felt it also added to the feeling of anxiety that was prevalent at the time. It also created controversy over the population growth and the increased pumping of water out of the Florida aquifer at a time when the state was working its way through 70 days of drought. In this podcast, we will be talking with Darryl Donkel, Alan Duckworth, and Dennis Phillips. All 3 of our guests owned and or operated businesses located next to the sinkhole at the time of the incident. We will start first with having our guests introduce themselves.
Okay, I'm Darryl Donkel. I own the property across the street from the Winter Park Sinkhole, and I've been there since back when the sinkhole first hit. I ran an automotive accessory business. We started it off with not much there, and thanks to the sinkhole, it really helped.
My name is Dennis W. Phillips. I was the owner of Allied Costumes and the building on the south side of Fairbanks Avenue in 1981. I moved to Florida in 1975 from Charlotte, North Carolina, maintained that business until 2009 when we sold the building and the business. I operated Allied Costumes there for 30-some years out of the operation.
Well, my name is Alan Duckworth, and I was the designer for Allied Costumes in Winter Park during the time of the Winter Park Sinkhole.
All 3 of our guests were asked about their prior knowledge of sinkholes before the Winter Park Sinkhole event.
Well, I had watched the news and seen stories of the earth swallowing up things and sinkholes, and had a general idea of what it was. I had never had any direct experience with a sinkhole, but I always assumed that sinkholes happened in Orlando in an area known as College Park or out in Pine Hills. Those were sort of the areas in Orlando that everyone thought where sinkholes would occur. Not anywhere in the Winter Park area did I ever imagine there'd be a sinkhole.
I showed up to work one day and the entire block is shut down. So you're like, okay, what's going on here? And people are oh, there's this sinkhole, and you're like, well, first of all, you don't know what it is, so it's like, what's a sinkhole? It's like this big giant hole, and it's gobbling up businesses, and people are getting all freaky, and of course, curiosity gets the better of you. You want to get over there, but a lot of people had already kind of blocked it off, and you didn't know how much bigger it was going to get. So it was kind of a weird thing that morning when we walked into the shop.
No, I had no idea what the heck it was. When someone told me a sinkhole, I said, what the heck is that? I mean, it just, I had no idea what a sinkhole was. It was kind of shocking just to see the thing. It was when it opened up on the side and you saw things that were huge oak trees just falling in, but they weren't just falling in one. It was the whole perimeter of it. I mean, it was pretty amazing. As the perimeter kept getting larger and larger and you step back a little further, you started thinking a little bit more about where you stand in the situation. You know what I mean?
Dr. Frank Kujawa, a geologist at the University of Central Florida who studied the sinkhole, added his own comments.
Well, I'm not sure most Floridians even were aware of sinkholes, so it certainly caught their attention. In fact, it caught the attention of people around the world. I was getting queries from military bases on the other side of the world, and newspapers all over the country and the world were carrying stories about it.
The sinkhole opened up overnight, and by the next morning, business owners had been alerted. We asked our guests about when they first heard about the sinkhole and their initial reaction.
I was there Saturday morning, and someone was telling me that the ground was falling in across the street, and I really kind of thought it was just a little tiny hole. When I got over there, of course, it had been started, I guess, earlier Friday night. I was there early Saturday morning, and the hole wasn't very large then as much, and of course it kept growing larger and larger. And the first thing we tried to do was see if we could get hold of Carl across the street, who owned the automotive place, and see if there was some possible way that we could get in there and push the cars away, because the way things were going, it looked like those Porsches and that camper, the Nissan camper, were going to go inside. So we turned around and couldn't get a hold of them fast enough, and at that time, I guess the way the laws are, you're not allowed to the Winter Park Police Department still is not allowed to break his fence and go into his property. So we weren't able to really do much.
Well, my first concern was that the costumes would go into the hole and I'd lose my property. So the first thing I did was I tried to determine whether the hole was going to grow anymore, and it did seem to be growing. I could see backs of buildings crumbling away. So my first thought was to remove the contents as much as possible from the shop that would be of use to me. And my idea was that the major portion of our business at that point was the mascots and the molds that we had. We had a whole lot of plaster molds and patterns and sewing machines. So my idea was maybe I could move that out of the way and at least I could keep going as a business. So my first thing to do was to go get a Ryder truck, which I did. And he came over to the shop, and we parked the truck out there. This is probably 2 or 3 hours after I was there originally looking at what was going on, and we started loading up molds and loading up machines and patterns. And we thought if it goes, it goes. But at least we've got the core of what our business is, and we can continue on somewhere else.
Well, you start to think about whether you're going to have a job the next day or not. Whether the building's going to be gone. That's always a concern when you're near something like that, whether your livelihood's going away. But one of the things we started to do immediately was start to plan to evacuate the building. So we were more concerned actually at the time with protecting the assets of the company and getting that stuff hauled away and out of harm's way. More than anything, I think that was more the focus, was just, preparing for the possibility that we may have to start up a business somewhere else.
As media and emergency services descended on the site of the sinkhole, local news stations broadcasted footage and reports of the ever-increasing diameter and depth of the hole. A large number of spectators began to gather at the site of the sinkhole. Our guests described the atmosphere at the time.
Everybody wanted to get close to the edge, Everybody likes to be close to the edge. That's part of life. That's where it helped me a lot. That's where it was, and my partner at the time, it helped us in bringing a crowd of people in that we wouldn't have normally have been able to do. And by having that, it really benefited us considerably. I mean, some of the neighbors were selling T-shirts next door to me, they came up with some of the best ones. They had some great artists over there, Alan, and I mean he could just draw anything pretty much. And they came out with a T-shirt before anybody I knew. Lou Montez came out with sinkhole posters, and of course I use it for the sinkhole as my logo for my business card and for my company invoice today, still even.
It was kind of a carnival-y atmosphere at one point, but there were those interesting little stories about, a car that fell in, because there was several cars that fell into this sinkhole because there was a car repair shop right there. Some of those cars were retrieved. Some of them I don't think were retrieved because they were just too far in and the cranes couldn't reach out, and I guess the counterbalance was just too shaky. But
Well, initially, the police kept people away from it with tape and so forth. Then once they got the hurricane fences up and they reopened Fairbanks Avenue, that took about a month to get Fairbanks Avenue reopened. It turned into kind of a party atmosphere. Everybody from everywhere wanted to see the great Winter Park Sinkhole. And many, many people from different parts of the country would and all over the state of Florida would come park and take a look at this gaping hole in the ground there. Well, they never closed off Fairbanks in terms of to pedestrian traffic, but all hours of the day or night, except late night, you could see people walking back and forth. Because remember, they had the lights on there for at least a month or two, and it became kind of a party atmosphere. The gentleman that owned the van place next to me, Darryl and Bobby, decided that they would get into souvenir business at least a little bit. So what they did was they bought an aerial photograph from straight down looking at the sinkhole, and they made a poster about 24 by 36 inches, and they had several thousand of them printed, and they were selling those at like $5 a piece. I didn't know what to, I was running a costume shop. My first thing was, how can I turn all of this street traffic into some revenue or at least some publicity for me? So I made a series of funny signs I put in front of my shop. One was, we're going to stay in business even if we have to go in the hole. Another one was, welcome to Pitt University. And guess what? The bottom just fell out of my business. And I just had a bunch of funny signs up for people to look at and laugh. So what happened was a guy got run off the streets. He had had a T-shirt made, and he got run off the streets by the police. They said he needed a vendor permit, and he just couldn't sell off of the street. So he came into my shop and said, do you mind if I set up a table outside your shop? And I said, well, you're going to have somebody to man it, and I don't care if you do it. It's okay, but why don't you just put it inside the shop and hang up a couple of T-shirts in the window and just put a big sign, souvenirs inside. So that's what he did. I would estimate that he probably sold 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 T-shirts out of there over that period of time. I mean, they were going like hotcakes.
During our discussions, our guests seemed to place the sinkhole in the context of a series of anxiety-causing events at the time. They also described what they thought was the impact of the sinkhole on the average person in Florida.
Well, first, we were in a drought at the time, and I think Life magazine had a current issue at that time that basically said, are we running out of water? And there was a big picture of the double page across the gutter spread of the Winter Park Sinkhole in that, and you could see all of my shop is visible in there too, or was. So what happened was essentially people couldn't believe that it happened, and there was this kind of an attitude that we were sucking the aquifer dry, and that was what was causing the sinkholes. So there was a great sense of unbelief about what was going on. And again, the early 80s, the country was in a recession. Ronald Reagan had just been elected and been shot that spring. So there was a kind of a bit of anxiety running through the country at that particular time. And I think that just added to the anxiety a bit. And there was a pressure to have the government basically mandate that insurance companies covered sinkholes. And I think a lot of people got an education about just exactly how the Florida topography worked.
I do know that a lot of the businesses that actually backed up to that sinkhole on the north side of Fairbanks Avenue kind of came and went. They really didn't stay there very long, and I'm not really sure why that was, but nothing ever really seemed to take hold after that.
This was only a year, almost a day from the eruption of Mount St. Helens, And that was understandable that people would be aware of that because the news reports continued for a number of days, whereas in the case of Winter Park Sinkhole, most of the news reports were only for a day, and yet it really got around. And I think that had to do with the fact that kind of used to volcanoes going off, and that's what they do, but the idea of the ground falling out from under you, especially without a whole lot of warning, just really catches people's attention.
Thank you for listening to this program, and special thanks to our guests. For more information on today's subject, please refer to the Winter Park Sinkhole, a report to the City of Winter Park by Jamal & Associates Incorporated Consulting Geotechnical Engineers, published in 1982. Special thanks to Dave Sirak and WFTV Channel 9 News for archival research and audio-video contributions. Also, special thanks to Dr. Frank Kujawa of the University of Central Florida and Ronald Morris of the Winter Park Parks and Recreation Department for their visual contributions. All interviews were conducted by Clayton Phillips.
Thank you for listening to the Riches Documentary Podcast. Feel free to contact us with any questions or comments on the program that you just heard. Please join us for the next episode, The Winter Park Sinkhole, The Effects and Aftermath.